Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tag Team, the Pokemon Trading Card Games premier podcasting duo. My name is Riley Holbert, joined by my good friend JW Krewall. JW, how's it going today?
It's going very well, Riley. How are you?
Man, I am doing great, I gotta say.
What's new that you're doing great?
And I mean, nothing, I'm just thriving. I was listening to, I don't remember what it was, but I was watching a video the other day, and this guy was talking about, like, working out and his mentality around it. And this isn't going to be some crazy motivational thing, but he was thinking like your mindset around it shouldn't be like, oh, I want to achieve this body type or I want to like lose X amount of weight. It should be like, oh,
Mhm.
I respect and love myself and like I want to do that for myself. Like as an act of like self love and self care. So
Yeah, yeah.
I've been trying to like put myself in that mindset over the last week. And like so whenever I clean my apartment or I'm working out, like I'm thinking like I'm doing this for me and like because I feel better in doing it.
Sure.
And I felt like better and happier.
That has helped your mental space?
I think so. I mean, obviously, it's just a short amount of time. Like this could just be an up week for me, but I've been feeling
Mhm.
good, and I think, your mentality is part of it, at least.
I definitely went through, the mentality thing like in middle school. Like I remember I used to be very just this is not life advice. First of all, this is not like I'm not trying to tell anyone what to do. Just full disclosure. But I was, I was just a very like angry and kind of sad child. I don't know. It's a
Yeah,
weird like angst.
for sure.
And then
Same
I
here.
just like one day I was like, I could be sad, but then like if I'm choosing to be sad and angry, and like I could just be happy.
Right, and
And
obviously it's not that
and
simple.
that's not
And you
that's
prefaced it
not
with that. You prefaced it with it's not that simple. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
and I've struggled with like depression my whole life. I'm on I take
yeah,
medication, like I have my own like mental health care,
right.
but it was more so like just readjusting my mindset for like why am I working out and eating well and doing all these things. Well, it's not so much because I want to be an Adonis, which I obviously I do have like a goal body type and like all those things,
And you
um
are an
but
Adonis.
like I want those things for myself because like I care about myself, and that's like the root of it, and framing it in that way is healthier for you. um
Yeah. I've actually never thought of that.
yeah, and it's something that I personally can relate to because I have a lot of like body image issues. And it's
Okay.
interesting because they fluctuate a lot. Like, one, I'll look at myself and I'll think, oh, you're pathetic and really skinny and ugly. And then you look at yourself like later that day and you're like, oh, you're like fat and disgusting and ugly. And so like I'm trying to reframe from that mindset. Um,
Okay.
so
Yeah. Yeah. That's really profound.
yeah.
It is.
So, a little life advice splashed into your Pokemon content, but
Yeah, I guess,
whatever
man.
you're
That's
doing,
cool.
do it for you, right? Like do it because you like it and enjoy it. And one thing that I really enjoy is Pokemon trading card
Me too, Riley.
game. Well, tell me that's not the segue of the century.
Well, dude, before we get too deep into it, I was talking with someone this morning and he was telling me that he has been listening since day one to the podcast. And he was telling me that when we were just on YouTube only, he would download the video, cut the, cut the video so it was just audio, and then he'd have that as his podcast to listen
Wow.
to on the way to work. And so, Alex, if you're listening, just I told you this morning, like, love the dedication. So happy that we can make this for you and that you're enjoying all the content that we produce. And yeah,
That's
that just
awesome,
like
man.
I felt like you should hear that, right?
That's super cool.
So it's very cool. We have we're coming up on the end of this season,
Yeah, I was
and
thinking about that like just yesterday, actually. How we're effectively, we've decided last year that we're going to divvy it up in seasons, like marking the competitive seasons. And technically, even though it doesn't really feel like it, we're at the end of the line here for, quote unquote season two.
yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, season 3, we get to put that up there. I mean, now it's really starting to feel like, if it wasn't already a commitment, it's starting to feel like that.
Yeah,
Just getting a lot of kind of stuff under our belt. I mean, we've done a lot of things, and I think we're kind of seeing that too. Like, you're just seeing a lot of other people try to podcast, and not to say that we're like the genesis of it, but we've certainly been the most consistent over the course of the last 3 years. And 2 years, and that's something to be proud of for sure. So just thank you again to the fans. If you guys aren't already plugged into our communities, you can go over to Twitch, and we're at twitch.tv/Munner. That's where we do the podcast live every Wednesday at 9:30 Eastern. And then I am on twitch.tv/FlexDaddyRighteous. And then we have our Twitter over at Tag Team Pokemon Podcast, which, is a great thing, great resource to follow as well. So very cool. All that said, let's hop into Pokemon discussion. We have, the end of the season. So effectively, we would have, all been in London right now if the world wasn't flipped on its head. And we would be, frantically trying to figure out the bust for Worlds. And so do you feel like, even though we're not in London right now, even though we're not in England, do you feel like the metagame has shifted to a point that we have kind of seen the cream rise to the top?
So it's a little interesting. I don't know if I have a great answer to the initial question, but I'm just kind of thought dumb for a second. I feel like podcasters do that all the time, and I'm just going to outright say that I'm going to do this.
Okay, straight up. I love it. He's going to go on tangent. I'm going to let you roll, Riley.
So I've noticed, first and foremost, like, I just want to call out, so many people have mentioned that, like, this is the time when Worlds will be happening and how much they miss everyone. And I do feel that to an extent, but I almost didn't even notice that so much time had passed that, like, now is going to be Worlds until other people called it out. Like, there wasn't, like, a pit in my stomach, like, oh, I should be at Worlds right now. It's like I saw other people, and I was like, wait a second. Like, it's actually been 6 months that we've been living like this. But that's a complete aside. Do I think the meta has completely developed? I think it's kind of in a weird spot because there isn't really an official substitute for the World Championship. There's not something that the community is fully unified on and behind. That being said, I think the largest subset of that is going to be that POG Championship, right? And we've mentioned it in passing a couple times on the cast. It's got a pretty large player base. I was checking in the Discord today. There's like 1,700 people in there or something. Maybe it's over 2,000. I don't. It depends on how they do the numbers on Discord. It was like 500 offline and like 1,700 was the second number. I don't know if that was total or offline. So it's either it's in the ballpark of 1,700 to 2,000. That's a lot of people.
That is.
And mad props to the Atlas Gaming folks who are working on that. Do I think that the meta has progressed to that end game? I want to say no, to be honest. And the reason I say that is twofold. So at Worlds, we saw the meta progress pretty far, but even then, it still didn't reach the end game, I don't think, of that format. We got close. Like, we got a lot of the archetypes were there, but the lists weren't there. And that's like the best players in the world labbing for, some of them were labbing for less time than others, but still, like, over the course of multiple months, that was the culmination of the best players in the world absolutely focused on the one task. I think that there hasn't been as much of a unified effort on that. And that's not because I don't think these tournaments are valid or anything of that nature. I think, you find a lot of players who have lost the motivation or seeing themselves out, or maybe only started testing once TCGO became available. You don't see that fervor where you're bringing proxies to locals just because you can. You have Tabletop Simulator, that's an option. You have like TCG1 as options, but it's not the same.
Right.
You can't really achieve that same level of like enthusiasm through a whole community in that way, unfortunately. And so I don't think it's really possible, because if we can't get to the end game of a meta when we have literally everyone in the world like labbing for the post-rotation format, and also the fact that it's pre-rotation, I think also has an element to it as well, where you have subsets of community that are working on post-rotation and don't really care about pre-rotation, and then you have people who are playing in POG who like want to do pre-rotation while it's available. So that's that's another factor in. Whereas with Worlds last year, for example, everyone was ready for rotation. Even if you weren't in Worlds, like you were thinking about rotations and rotation decks. So you had everyone in the world. They're all playing these decks. They're all butting their heads together, and we still couldn't get to the end game of the format completely.
So
I don't. If it's not possible for Worlds last year, I don't see how it could be possible for the Worlds format this year.
Yeah, especially when you factor in that, we're not even talking about the best players in the world necessarily. Like the day one is just literally anyone that wants to play. And that's not a, slight on anyone, but it's like certainly the quality of the average player is going to be lower than it would be at Worlds anyway. So that's an interesting thing to think about, is like a day one meta versus a day two meta, and how, you have that at Worlds where it's kind of like, okay, what do I think people are going to play in day one, and then will they switch in day two? And there's a lot of questions that go along with that. But even more so now, the day one meta could be completely different from a day two meta, just because the vast amount of people that are trying to qualify for day two that they don't necessarily have to have any any accomplishment, and
Right.
that's cool and kind of scary, and
Right. And I think the way that you mean to phrase, I don't think you're phrasing it wrong, but I think the way you're trying to portray this is, it's not really about like the skill level or anything like that. It's more so when you get these concentrated pools of players, it's much easier to understand like what they're thinking and what they're going to play. When you get a huge pool of players that anyone can enter, like you have no idea what the mindsets of those people are.
Yeah, right.
So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's another great way to phrase what I just said.
So it really opens up all sorts of rabbit holes that you can go down when you're thinking of like trying to predict the meta.
And that's a problem too. I mean, we talk about this a lot, but just kind of getting in your own head about, okay, well, here are the top decks, and everyone says they're the top decks, but then, maybe this other deck we're just completely overlooking, and that ends up being the best deck and having the most placements. And I mean, yes, like to an extent, any content that you listen to, the people that are producing the content only have so much time to think about and test what they're talking about. And so like you can never take anything that anyone says, the best player in the world, the worst player in the world. Like you can draw positives and negatives, I think, from anyone that speaks, that creates content. And so there's gonna be things that slip through the cracks, is all I mean to say.
Yeah. So that all being said, that giant preface, let's kind of dive into what our thoughts are going to be. I jotted down a couple of decks that we talked through before the cast. This certainly is not inclusive. We might even think of something in the middle of talking about these decks, and we're like, oh yeah, we didn't write this down, but obviously this is something we should talk about. But what we have jotted down, starting from the top, we got to talk about Eternatus. I mean, this is the cover card of the set. It is really the focal point of the Darkness Ablaze format. Got that Mega Ray feel to it, where you're drawing a lot of cards with your draw to 6 Pokemon. You got your bench of 8, so you're doing a little over 240 damage. But the thought is there, like you're doing 30 for the bench. So JW, I've been a proponent of Eternatus for the last few weeks. I really like the deck. I still really like the deck. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, it's definitely the biggest like go ham deck. If you look at it, it's the new thing. It's definitely something that Pokemon has wanted to, make a big thing. Like that's, like a very reasonable reason to play it, is that it is the new deck and it is very strong. And like, it is something that the testers, when they're creating the cards, said, okay, we would like to make this because it's better than what has come before it, in their testing. In order to get people to buy cards. Okay, another topic. But it is very strong, and I think one of the biggest things that it has going for it is its Vikavolt matchup. And obviously we have to talk about these decks in context of other decks, so we're going to talk about Vikavolt more in depth later. But the Vikavolt deck, as it's starting to kind of formulate around this kind of just very straightforward concept, I mean, it still has a very bad matchup against Eternatus. And I think that's one of like the selling points for me when I'm looking at whether or not I want to play Eternatus. Now, it doesn't have necessarily great matchups across the board. It can get kind of skunked out by fire sometimes. ADP can be a very unconventional matchup. Like it feels very close. And then there are things like Decidueye, which are really, really difficult to beat with Eternatus. And so there's some positives, there's some negatives. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Eternatus in terms of matchup spread.
So when I think of Eternatus, there's only so many dark Pokemon that you can tech, and even then, there's only so many dark Pokemon that actually like do something. When I think of the Hoopa pair, neither of them is really that fantastic of a card, to be honest. They're fine.
Yeah.
but
they're like easily played around or
yeah,
don't do enough damage to be that relevant.
I really don't like the Zapdos Hoopa that does the 90. I really don't like that card. For multiple reasons. Like switching around it is annoying, attaching an energy to it is annoying. Like the poke is fine, but your attachments are so valuable in the Eternatus deck as well that it just feels kind of icky to do it. That's besides the point though. Like the dark Pokemon, you don't have a lot of tools in your box. Like really the only tricks that Eternatus really has at its disposal is potentially Veltal GX shenanigans and potential like Zigzagoon shenanigans. And outside of that, it's a relatively straightforward deck. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. We see straightforward decks do fantastically well all the time. But I think that's probably its biggest weakness, and that's where you see bad matchups appear. So going down that list, I think Eternatus does exactly what I thought and wanted it to do really well, where it'll reliably 2-hit KO any VMAX, potentially 1-hit KOing Zigzagoons, and it will reliably 1-hit KO anything that's not a VMAX. And I think it does that job really, really well. What it doesn't do a good job against is things that can tip prize trades against it. So the ADP matchup is close just because you can 1-hit KO the ADP out of the gates, but they also can just really tilt the prize trade. And we were talking about this right before the cast where, it feels so bad that you can 1-hit KO an ADP on turn 2, like before they altered creation potentially. I guess it would have to be altered for this to really happen, but like let's say they altered turn 2 and you went second or something, and you KO the Eternatus, you KO the ADP with your Eternatus. Now it's 3 prizes to 6. Like you should theoretically in your brain be in a good spot there. But they
and with a 340 undamaged Pokemon in the active,
right, no damage on your board, like you're feeling good, but there's just always the potential that you can go Gust and win. With 2 attacks, and there's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing you can do to outtrade that unless they bench a second ADP for some reason, which that's on them.
right.
You don't have control over that. So and granted, I still think the matchup is close because of the fact that you can come out of the gates so aggressively. And also like Gust while also powering up reliably is like not something that you can necessarily pull off every game. So the matchup's close, but that's just an example of there's a deck that has a bag of tricks to it. Like it gets around prize trades, and that is something that Eternatus can't necessarily handle very well.
And then the other thing too that is, I mean, it's a hindrance. I think like you're talking about, the bag of tricks is just like the way it has to be constructed, and I feel like the lists that are coming out are pretty strong for Eternatus just because you have to, you have to have so many Pokemon on your bench. You have to devote that many slots to all these Pokemon that you don't necessarily want. Like we're talking about like the Hoopas and stuff. Like at a certain point outside of the Eternatus, the Crobats and the Zigzagoons, you're kind of like, okay, well, I guess, Hoopa,
you got the dark symbol on you. So
yeah, right. And like, I mean, I guess Spiritomb, or like, I guess South, people are messing with Meowth, and there's just comes a point where it's like, well, I don't really know what to put in, and there's nothing that really like extremely aids me in my quest to win the game, but like you have to include. So those kind of feel like dead slots to me in a lot of scenarios, in a way, in that they're not as geared toward helping you win. Like sometimes you're just playing Hoopas down just so that you can fulfill the requirement, and they're never going to come into play. And sometimes like you're benching Crobats, your only way to draw with a Pokemon, just because you need that extra 30 damage, even though you've played a Crobat earlier in the game. So there's some weird things that come around with the deck building that just kind of hinder it, where you can't really do anything too spooky. Like Eternatus just is
right, and I think I agree with the Crobat point more than the Hoopa point, because I don't think it really matters if you have a 1 prizer on your bench that doesn't do anything. Most of the time.
Sure.
But I think we're getting at the same underlying point where the deck is so straightforward and it's trying to do one thing, and it does that thing very well, But when other things like ADP or Decidueye or mill decks that remove energy, like all those things are not playing the game in the same way that you're trying to play the game. Uh,
Yeah.
and when that happens is when Eternatus falters. I still think it's a very good deck. It can win a lot of matchups just off of like being really aggressive. It's probably the like most often the most aggressive deck on the second turn of the game, where it's doing
Mhm.
between 210 and 270 reliably on the second turn, assuming you hit your attachments. Um,
Mhm.
and there's a lot to be said for that. And I think
Yeah.
decks that do reliably do a lot of damage very quickly tend to be successful. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can't hate
I mean,
it.
yeah, but it's just interesting. Like, it is probably the best VMAX Pokemon. I think we would both agree with that. Just like if you look at the card, like the damage potential for how little cost it takes, like the best VMAX card that we've seen. But it doesn't have that supporting cast that something like Scorch might have, where you could come in with a Heatran and like one shot something, or you
There's
can
no
play all these
welder
other
either.
Pokemon. What's that?
No dark welder either.
Yeah, no Dark Welder. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, there's no like this supporting cast. Like, you just have Eternatus, pretty much manual attachments, unless you want to go some kind of turbo patch route, which probably isn't ideal. And then you're just trying to swing and like hoping that your draws are good enough that you can get out, what you need to get out the turn that you need to get it.
Yeah.
There's no real tricks, like you're saying.
I largely agree, and so I think we're gonna end up hitting the same point over and over if we keep talking about Eternatus. Straightforward deck, powerful deck. I still like it. Like that's
Yeah,
all
no,
that
no, no.
said. Like
And-
I still
and
like
all
it.
that to say, yeah, and all that to say, like that's not necessarily
Yeah, like
bad.
it's still actually probably my favorite deck to play.
Yeah.
But it has flaws, and acknowledging those is important.
Yeah.
So let's go just right down the list then. I think the first deck that you specifically called out with Eternatus is Vikavolt, and
Yeah.
especially in this pre-rotation format, Vikavolt has certainly taken the world by storm. Getting the access to Electro Powers and the Thunder Mountains is certainly a boon. You have been a big proponent of Vikavolt for a while now. How are you feeling about that deck?
I mean, I think it's really good. I'm pretty set on just about shipping it. Like, it just feels very good against the known decks.
Yeah.
Aside from Eternatus, like it should reliably beat ADP. It should reliably beat Fire. Maybe have kind of a iffy matchup against Scorch depending on how they draw. But it just feels like a deck that doesn't take a ton of bad matchups and can even wiggle out of a lot of bad matchups. I've just been loving the deck a lot more now that I've ditched a lot of the fat in terms of Mareep and Slumbering Forest. It was kind of cool to play with that, and I think that like has a place to be played. But when you just make it more of trying to get out that second attack and doing 190 at the end of the game,
liked the Mareep
like
Forest, man.
no, for sure. But I think it was viable. Like, I think it was like a thing that should have been discovered and should have been played and like should have been messed around with. But then making the deck be able to stream 190 at the end of the game, you just get to this point that you're checkmating towards the end of the game, and like you just get to this point where you almost can't lose when you have like two Vikavolts on the bench that both have 3 energy attached, and like you're just item locking and you're just waiting to draw your last boss, or you're waiting to get enough damage on the active to do 190 to it and knock it out. I mean, there's just a lot of bonuses there to playing Vikavolt, that it can wiggle its way out of bad matchups. It has some pretty solid matchups again against like ADP and Fire, I would say the two biggest ones, and against things like Mad Party, it just is going to destroy. Against things like straight Zacian, it's just going to body. And so it's a deck that I would think a lot of people will gravitate towards because item lock, again, can get you out of sticky situations.
Yeah, I mean, item lock historically a fan favorite or fan least favorite, depending on which fan you ask. But certainly a powerful archetype. Like, historically, item lock for low energy costs has been very good. I don't think that's going to change with the onset of Vikavolt. One thing I definitely agree with you on is that second attack on Vikavolt is super good, actually. And it kind of works out really well, where you get a poke or two off with item lock and then you blow something up. But then also the time that you afforded yourself with the item lock has also set up your future attackers. and it all culminates in the fact that you're attacking with a 2-prizer.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
Vikavolt, honestly, of the decks that we have listed, is one of the decks that feels most impacted by rotation to me. We're losing Electric Power, we're losing Thunder Mountain.
Yeah, no doubt. I like really don't think the deck works without Electro Power.
Yeah.
It just, and that's pretty obvious. Just the damage boost and being able to hit the certain numbers is really, really valuable. But Vikavolt is a deck that I am not going to be shocked if a lot of players play it, because it does have a little bit of room to be spooky. I mean, you can play it with hammers. You could play it with, I think Turbo Patch is pretty much the norm, but you can do it with just a bunch of different things to disrupt. You could play it with Absol. You can play it with like Galarian Slowbro if you want to get some poison damage as well. You can play with Jirachi. You can play without Jirachi. There's a lot of different ways to build it that are all reasonably good, and that can all reasonably win a high percentage of games. I was playing it before the stream, and I just wanted to get 10 games in with it before I stream later tonight. And I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 8-2 or something like that.
There you
8-2. Just like, not really even thinking about it, maybe not putting a ton of effort into the list, but just running it, seeing how things felt again. And it felt great. Yeah. It was a really great deck.
I mean, one thing I want to specifically call out as well is you talked about Bag of Tricks and you listed a bunch of Pokemon. I want to even argue, like, compared to Eternatus, Vikavolt itself has more to it than like the entirety of the Eternatus deck, right?
Yeah.
You could just play Vikavolt and like the supporting items, and that already is a more complicated deck than the entire Eternatus deck.
Sure.
That's not a problem.
One of the coolest things that I like about Vikavolt is that it can utilize Gust, I think, better than any other deck in the format. Yeah. And that is just like, you can Boss's Orders up something to stall for a turn, like very reliably. There are a lot of 2 retreat Pokemon, Oranguru, Zacian, those both, just come to mind instantly. And then many others, but you can Gust up something. And then if you need that extra turn, you can usually buy it. Right, where you Gust up something that you don't necessarily want to KO, like an Oranguru, and just stall it for a turn or two while you get energy built up, or while you find the resources that you need, the Electro Powers or something, on the next turn to take the big one shot on the threat, that your opponent has. That's one of the things that I really valued, in that there were times where I was playing the deck and I was like, okay, I don't win if they get an attack off. I just need like a turn or two more, and just being able to Gust up something on the bench, stall it, and you can really outmaneuver your opponent in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I don't know if you watched the Tricky Dim stream today, but it happened live against Andrew.
Yeah. right.
That unlock is powerful, man. I mean, what can you say? It's historically been powerful. It's probably going to be powerful for the entirety of its existence in the Pokemon trading card game. You know, you can't sleep on item lock decks. I think Vikavolt is probably in my top 3 decks that I would consider for the POG Championship, or any post-rotation or pre-rotation rather gameplay at the moment. It's just so strong, and I feel like you really want to take advantage of it while you can, because it has so much that it benefits from pre-rotation. Like, and not as much as other decks that it's like, it likes to have certain cards. It's like, this deck really likes to have these cards, It loves the Electric Powers, it loves the Thunder Mountain.
Although I would say for Vikavolt that I think it has the biggest target on its back of the new decks. Yeah. Like, we could talk about Eternatus, but the amount of Eternatus that and this is again on the ladder, so like we won't know about what happens, but I think to an extent we can take the results from the ladder and apply them.
Well, I would even argue for a tournament this big, like, the ladder is actually probably a decent representation, especially the people on the ladder right now are probably people who are thinking about playing in tournaments like this.
Sure. And so, I just haven't seen a lot of Eternatus on the ladder, and I've seen a very sizable amount of Vikavolt. And so I would just think that if you're heading into the Atlas Championships, you would want an answer to Vikavolt in your deck, or to play a deck that can handle Vikavolt, or at least have a game plan against it, because it is something that has been played a lot on the ladder, I've noticed.
So this is your glowing endorsement of Phalanx and Stonjourner, right?
Yes, everyone play Phalanx. I will say Stonjourner was kind of good.
I'm just personally proud of myself for not forgetting Phalanx's name
There you go.
for like the third time.
I
So
know. We've done it.
I really am just bad. I don't know why, because I like Phalanx, but I just when it
I mean, it's
when it
definitely
comes down and the pressure's on, remembering Phalanx's
I know.
name is tough, man.
When the bright lights are on, you crumble.
It's true, man. At least when it comes to Phalanx. So Vikavolt, fantastic deck. Definitely got a big target. If you're looking to play in any of these pre-rotation formats, make sure that you have a way to deal with Vikavolt. Like, if you lose immediately to a, turn one going second, paralyzing bolt, probably should reconsider like your
Maybe
deck
think
building.
about it. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Although I mean, it is like it's going to have a target on its back, and I think one of the few ways that you can counter Vigavold is just to play a deck like not entirely built to beat it, but like an Eternatus deck, would beat it. So you have to make your deck choice to beat Vigavolt, as opposed to like I don't think there are any techs or anything that you could just slide into something to make
it's
it
not
have
really
a good
to beat
Vigavolt
item lock decks. It's usually
matchup.
not text, right? It's more about like
Yeah.
deck building and deck choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So that just throwing that out there.
Next up on our list is one that we also specifically called out earlier, and that's the ADP deck. I mean, I feel like we probably don't even need to talk about ADP too much, in the fact that we already know what ADP does. It does the same thing as always. The actual lists for ADP really aren't being too transformative, besides maybe including Turbo Patch. I mean, I don't have a lot to add to the ADP discourse besides the fact that it is continually powerful. It continues to skew prize trades in its favor. It's going to warp the entirety of the Pokemon metagame for the entirety of its existence in the trading card game. And it's good.
Yep. Well said. But yeah, definitely another deck. I mean, of course, be prepared for it, and probably just the deck that, it's the known quantity going into this tournament. I mean, I think we're getting a lot of new things that should rise to the top. Like Firebox, we haven't really seen in past formats. Eternatus obviously new, Vikavolt obviously new. So you look at ADP as just kind of being like a comfort pick, a very strong deck still, obviously. It's something that, people will just kind of default to if they haven't tested, I think, especially. And, they played ADP, maybe they played ADP 2 formats ago. Maybe they played ADP last format, and they kind of look to it and say, hey, you know what? This is still very, very good, a very, very broken ability, and should be one of the best decks for the POG championships.
Yeah. I mean, ADP's with Zacian, at least since the addition of Zacian, has continued to be one of the best decks. That's not going to change.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, like you look at it, like maybe someone would play combo Zacian, but I think the amount of combo Zacian that will be played, and certainly the amount of combo Zacian that will do well, will all kind of hinge upon Vikavolt. That's a deck that truly like needs to have items to function properly. And if Vikavolt is this kind of bigger quantity, very sizable share of the metagame, then that's where a deck like ADP Zacian just like makes way more sense than something like combo Zacian. So just saying that maybe in the last format we saw ADP Zacian kind of take up 7 to 10% of the metagame, and like all the Zacian variants were kind of split in this way. I think they'll kind of coalesce more around ADP as opposed to more item heavy builds.
Yeah, and I think the ADP is pretty much made itself the prevailing variant in the current format. So I would agree with you there.
Sure. I think also one of the cool things that you can do with ADP, not to talk too much about it, because we all kind of know, again, the known quantity thing, but you can include like a water attacker, and as fire continues to rise, I mean, seriously,
I know. I'm just laughing because you said the way you said it. I don't know. It was funny.
But as fire continues to rise, having that water attacker, that splashable water attacker, that was a good pun. That splashable water attacker.
Yeah, this is less funny now.
Okay, well, I ruined it. So having that splashable water attacker is very valuable because it just gives you more matchup coverage and type coverage.
Yeah. So we've referenced this deck a lot, though, and I think we got to go into our next one here, which is going to be Fire. Primarily the Centiskorch deck. So Centiskorch's been tearing up the ladder a little bit.
I hope you can speak more to this, because I'm either missing all the streams where Scorch does well, or I'm just like not playing a good list myself, because for me it just hasn't been performing um, the way that I feel like other people have had it perform. It just feels like one of these decks that I'm looking at people saying, "Oh yeah, Scorch is good. Like Scorch is like this top deck," and I'm just kind of shaking my head and questioning that. And so I'd be curious, Riley, to hear you speak on Scorch and what you think the matchup spread is, and why you would play Scorch over just a Welder box.
Sure. So as compared to like a welder box, um,
Mm-hmm.
well, first off, I don't. In terms of fire decks, I think the Babylocephalon deck is probably the superior one. Um, I just don't think there's any meaningful discussion to be had about Babylocephalon. Like even less so than ADP, because it's a more straightforward deck, and it does one thing. It's done the same thing. It's not changing at all. It's continuing to do the same thing. Um, but with regards to Scorch, I I haven't been too impressed when I play it myself, but I feel like it's one of those decks where every time I'm against it, they like immediately get a welder and also some energies to continue to power up, and I can't KO it, and it gets stronger, and it just gets absurd. And so I think part of Scorch's appeal is that snowballing element to it, where it continues to power itself up more. So if
Yeah.
you're winning, you win harder over time,
Yeah.
and so that makes the deck feel better, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Because like when you beat people, like you're really beating them, right? Like
You're just pounding it like foot on the throat.
Yeah, like
you're gasping for air.
they're not happy about that. So
No.
I think that's where like part of the sentiment comes from, is because you have these insane blowout games and they feel incredible, and obviously you'll have some close games too. But then if you have a loss after that, you'll remember the game that you destroyed the person with and got like 1,000,000 damage on turn 3.
Yeah. So are you kind of saying that you think maybe the hype around Scorch is a little unwarranted?
I mean, I think it's fine. Like, it's got a lot of HP, and you could say that about every VMAX, but I think that's kind of a saving grace for all of the VMAXs. Is they got a lot of health, so they got time to work with. I think if I was going to play a VMAX and my goal is to do a lot of damage, I would probably play Eternatus.
Yeah.
Because it's a more consistent, I don't know if consistent is the right word, but like it's a reliable strategy. It does the same thing. It's always doing a lot of damage, not really reliant on continuing to find a bunch of fires and attack to power itself up and welder and all this stuff. You set up a board with Eternatus, and that's your board. And you're swinging, you're good.
Yeah.
I don't think Scorch is outright bad. If I'm gonna put a 3 prizer on the board, I want it to be ADP or Eternatus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel pretty similarly, and that's why I just haven't thought Scorch is anything special. I mean, you're very reliant on Welder. I would argue more so than something like Firebox, just in the sense that you have less time. If you are putting the VMAX into play, I'm surprised. I want to get more reps with the deck and see if it really is something that should be taken seriously. But as of now, I would say something like, the Firebox that I was playing it on stream the other day had some very good results, and I liked it a lot. And then all my testing, even like pre-PCGO when we were doing tabletop with Andrew, like it just wasn't something that I would have ever thought would be good enough.
Yeah. And I mean, Firebox is fine. It's not really a deck that I've ever truly liked very much. I really enjoyed the Charizard version, like right after Worlds, but like since then I haven't been as much of a fan of playing Firebox. It's still good though. And it's kind of like it's kind of like Babylocephalon in the fact that like not a lot's changing about it fundamentally. It's still the same dang deck that you've been seeing, man.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. But does my logic for Scorch make sense? Like, when you win, you're really blowing people out. So like, oh yeah, this deck's insane, man.
Yeah, I just struggle because like you have, the numbers just don't work out for me. So let's say you welder onto a Scorch and you get an attachment, like you're only doing 160. You're not KOing Crobat. You're nowhere near KOing an ADP.
Well, I think the threat of Centiskorch is the looming aspect of it, where
Yeah.
if it's got a lot of health, it's got 320 of those suckers, and so
Yeah.
if you fail to knock it out, now it's a scarier Centiskorch than it was the turn before.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I feel like isn't that kind of, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of the thing with most decks, though. I guess most decks
Centiskorch hits like a break point where
most
like it
decks,
deals everything immediately.
Yeah, most decks get a scarier board if you don't knock them out, and Centiskorch just becomes a scarier Pokemon.
Centiskorch itself gets scarier, and it makes itself scarier. It feeds into itself.
Right.
And it's kind of exciting in that way too.
I guess. I don't know. I'll play it some more.
You're a hater.
Though, granted, I need more time with it, and I need a good list. Because either my list is horrible or it's really not as good as it needs to be. But I'm really open. Like Centiskorch is kind of, for me, kind of an unknown factor. I've got my reps in with the Vikavolt. I've got my reps in with ADP. I've got my reps in with Eternatus. I've got my reps in with Firebox, but I haven't gotten my reps in with Centiskorch.
Reps, man. You gotta get your reps with Centiskorch.
Gotta get your reps in, man. Gotta do your, gotta get
your 100 games of Centiskorch in to be ready.
Yeah, exactly. So.
One last deck that I wanted to call out, and I'll preface this by saying, if we didn't call it a deck specifically, it's not because we don't think it's viable outright. There's plenty of other decks that are good. There's just kind of like we said for like Babycephalon and Firebox. You don't need to call them out too much at this point. Like, they're known quantities within the realm of the game that we're playing at this point. So things like Pikarom, slightly less so, but Dragapult, Decidueye, Spiritomb decks, like, we know what those decks do. We know how they work. And they are occupying the same niche they always have. But the last deck that I want to hit on is the mill decks. They disappeared for a little bit there with Dragapult kind of oppressing them to a certain extent, keeping them down with their sniping constantly. And I think they've really made themselves poised to return. I think they have decent matchups against a lot of the top decks that we've just mentioned. So have you experimented at all with mill? I'll just pose that question to you first.
I have not. And the other thing is, I haven't seen it played.
That's funny.
I mean, mill is... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't see it a lot. It's certainly not like, the original Sword Shield set drop, right? Where it was just everywhere and it was really toxic. I don't see it like that, but I have seen it. And every time I see it, it feels really icky, for me.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
And, especially, we talk about these Eternatus decks being straightforward. Mill really punishes that. They get in there with those crushing hammers and recycling those suckers. And, what is an Eternatus to do, man?
Right. No, for sure. Eternatus seems like a sketchy matchup. ADP seems bad, though. I mean, it was historically not a matchup you'd like to see. Obviously, now that ADP has, maybe some ADP lists have gone away from having like all the gust that they used to have. You're remembering lists that play. I was talking about this actually this morning with someone where it was like, the 4 Pokemon catcher and then the 4 custom catcher.
That was like my favorite.
Always gusting.
I think that's like my favorite deck of the year. It was that deck.
Yeah, for sure. It was super fun. But like, there's a little less gust. People are playing like a Great Catcher and 3 Bosses Orders, or 3 Bosses Orders and an Eldegoss, or some combination of those. And you're seeing just a little less gust. So maybe there's more to be said about that matchup now that just the way lists are generally being built, that there is more chance for a mill deck against ADP.
I certainly think that's one factor there, although I'd also argue some of these decks are including turbo patches in addition to metal patches,
right?
And then you get into this weird place where they can't gust as much, but the offset of that is when they can't really be denied energy. Usually your end game against those ADP decks is to prevent them from gusting for long enough that you can deny energy, but like that's so difficult now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Or more difficult. And then you look at other matchups that mill might be unfavored in, and I think another one, is Vikavolt. Like, That seems like a very rough matchup. You're not going to be able to get rid of much of their energy. You're not going to be able to disrupt in the ways that you want to disrupt reliably. And so that seems very tough as well for Mill.
Yeah, but then
Fire.
the offside of that is
Oh,
like
go
the
ahead.
Cephalon decks are super good for you. The Senna Scorch
Yeah.
decks, I guess, are a horrible matchup, so that's a thing. But like, you got your Vikavolts are not very good, but your Eternatus is good. I think your ADP is probably passable enough that you can play against it.
Mhm.
And then a lot of those more niche decks, like the Picarams of the world, or the Spiritombs of the world, or the Decidueyes of the world, like those aren't going to be able to really handle you very well.
Right. Right.
So I mean,
Yeah,
I
you
think there's
take
a legit spot for it, or like
yeah. I
control
mean,
as a general thing.
certainly you take very, very good matchups against certain decks, and then very kind of scary matchups
Yeah, it's the kind of
against
thing
other.
that would benefit more from like a day two thing where you can know the meta a lot better going in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. Like if you see day one and like there's like no Vikavolt, maybe you can squeak by and like you just like win the coin flips against an ADP and prevent them from getting an altered creation off early or something like that. And you just
Yeah.
take your chances against like one very bad matchup as opposed to having multiple in day two.
Yeah. So I think that's a pretty good perspective on the meta. We've called them out a couple times now, but some other random decks would be the Picarams of the world, the other Zacian variants like Luke Metal and Combo Zacian. Dragapult is kind of a thing. The Decidueye, kind of a thing. Trying to think what else. You mentioned Salamence earlier. I hate that card, man. I don't know. And then I think you have to mention this deck for the fans out there, and that's Mad Party. It's kind of a thing.
Yeah. Kind of a thing. I mean,
congratulations,
it's not
Mad
horrible.
Partiers.
It's not horrible. So Mad Party would be something where you probably want to play. I was playing this with Danny on stream the other day as well, and he played a Naganadel GX for the Stinger. And now that you have these 3 prize Pokemon, the idea is just that you Stinger, and then you just need to have like 2 attacks to win the game. And so I thought that was a cool potential, or yeah, that's a cool potential. I guess you would need 1 attack because you would need to get
you're supposed
Wheezing.
to poke like ahead of time.
Yeah, you would get like Wheezing or poke ahead. Yeah, exactly. And take the last prize there. So I don't know. That's something cool that I just really admired.
Yeah, it's a cool concept for sure. I mean, Mad Party, you can't lie. Mad Party is definitely fun.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can't wait to play it post rotation because I think it'll be in a better position than it is now.
Let's talk about the tournament breakdown, though. So we mentioned a lot of decks. JW, in your opinion, what are the top 3 decks going to be?
Top 3 decks probably are ADP and Lightning. So Vikavolt and then Pikarom. I really think Pikarom is going to be a major
Pikarom
player.
Is still that big?
I don't see why it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really lose anything, and it was like
arguably
the best deck of last format. It doesn't have any like super hard counters that I can think of, and it's still it's very cheap. So for like a day one metagame, like again, or these are all these people that literally have no, they have no disincentive to do poorly. It's not like you're going to London and you're like spending all this time and you're spending all this money and you're like trying to be correct. There's going to be all these people just like chilling on their couch in their underwear, Cheeto stained hands, clicking the keyboard. And like, I'm just going to one last ride with Pikarom as I know it.
So, I don't know if you had to portray the Pikarom players quite like that, but sure.
Nah, just kidding.
This is like kind of an aside, but do you think that TCGO prices will play a factor into the metagames of these tournaments?
Oh, sure. I mean, we were talking about how the ladder could like affect how we are thinking about the metagame as a whole, and just like I haven't seen a lot of Eternatus. That's the truth of it. Maybe other people that are testing have, but I think like you look at that kind of deck and it's if Crobats are, let's say, conservatively 25 packs, and Eternatus VMAX hovers around 20 packs, and then the V is like 10 packs, and then you're looking at playing, 4s of each. All of a sudden you have like a $100 PTCGO deck somewhere between 50 and $100 in codes to get this deck. And that's just not a thing, that's just not doable for a lot of people, or that's not just not an investment that a lot of people want to make. So for sure, I think that will absolutely be a factor.
Yeah, that's rough for sure.
Yep.
It's kind of the same thing with Dragapult. All the Dragapult, I think, clawed its way into the meta over time.
Mm-hmm. For sure, it definitely did towards the end game. I think you get people that get more coins or whatever, they can buy the packs from the store. Like the more people do that, they get more trade locked ones, but they just get their stuff from playing the game more. That'll absolutely be a thing, I think, after we settle into, and the code price will drop. And yeah, of course, the longer we go, the more we should see. But I think, to go to your point, it will absolutely be a factor that they were so expensive to start out that we shouldn't see a ton of them.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is I would think that Eternatus would be the most popular deck in a vacuum, where if there are no outside factors and everyone just got to play the deck that they wanted to play, in a communist society where everyone had unlimited access to coins and packs and all that, that Eternatus would probably be the most popular deck, in my opinion. I don't know how to frame it now. I haven't really thought about it critically enough, I don't think. But if it was up to me, I would say the top three would be actually the first three decks that we talked about, with Eternatus, Vikavolt, and ADP. With price being a factor in the size of the tournament, I kind of agree that Pikarom is poised to stay.
Sure.
Babylcephalon as well, maybe Pikarom, Babylcephalon, occupying that, fighting for that third spot.
Yeah. Babylcephalon is another one that I just don't. It should fold. I mean, I haven't done a lot of testing. It should fold to Vikavolt. It might be the kind of thing where I'm overestimating Vikavolt.
Babylcephalon. That's right.
Yeah, Babylcephalon, obviously being very good against the VMAX deck, should have a place. I don't know if it'll be a big place though.
Yeah. So cool. So one last thing we want to talk about ahead of your questions, and that is the somewhat new debate in the Pokemon trading card game. I was gonna say an age-old debate, but it's really not. This is a relatively new thing in Pokemon, and that is it better to go first or second in the Pokemon trading card game? JW, you got 2 minutes to explain your thoughts.
Yeah, this was a tweet by Andrew, and he basically just said, yes, it is better now to go second in Pokemon trading card game, and obviously that's not a nuanced opinion. It's definitely kind of a opinion that is going for kind of a reaction, but it is true, and he's expounded on it more and just saying that going second is more and more viable, and going first is less and less the optimal way to play certain decks. And I would totally agree. You look at certain things like ADP. I would argue Vikavolt that for me do want to go first. But then you look at other things, fire stuff, the Sense of Scorch, and even arguably Eternatus wants to go second. And so I think that's a cool new debate that displays more skill, both in deck building and in-game play. And I think that's a great debate. I think that's great for the game that we're even talking about this.
Yeah, I will say I pretty much agree with everything you've outlined. I do think second has really risen up into being generally better. Circumstantially, there's obviously circumstances that factor into whether first or second is better, but I think second, if you were picking completely blind, second is probably better for most decks at this point. What I want to say outside of that is I think if we ever get to the point where going second is objectively better with every single deck and it's not a debate, then that is very bad. And I think that's actually worse than a metagame where first is considered the better turn. And the reason I think that is because, going first, you're very limited in what you can do right now. And second, you can do everything, including attack and play supporters. So if that if that is objectively better, that's very unhealthy, because you have these people who are trapped essentially in their first turn and can't do anything. It kind of brings you back to these weird, I don't want to say donk, but similar to donk type metas where a person effectively does nothing. They'll attach and pass or something. And you see that happen all the time for people going first now, where they can't do that much. And maybe part of it is engines of these decks. But I think if we ever get to the point where second is always objectively better, and everyone who wins the coin flip will always choose to go second, then that is not a good thing.
Right. Yeah.
From a game design perspective.
Well said.
As the game rules are currently laid out, at least.
Sure. And I think, I mean, a fix to that would just be you can't attack on your first turn, but you can play a supporter.
Oh yeah, that'd be.
And there are problems with that too. You know, there are issues with that, I think, too. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing right now. We're seeing this shift, and like you said, if it ever goes completely towards going second, is just going to be better. But I think we have enough, support Pokemon where that's never going to be really the case.
Right.
And like you said,
I think it's not to the point where it's horrible right now. It's just something I think that we should think about.
Well, the other thing too is that we are seeing, I think, generally, and I don't speak for everyone in every deck, but I think we're generally seeing a lack of or a decrease in Jirachi play, and certainly for post rotation, like that is not something that a lot of players play. Just deck lists are built in a different way in post rotation. I think Jirachi is being left out of that conversation there, and that seems to me like a great consistency card that kind of makes up for the lack of a supporter on a first turn. If you're able to get a quick ball off that Jirachi, you just get that extra dig, get that extra ability to set up in the early game.
I mean, I want to specifically give an example. Even I think Expanded has reached that state. Bans aside, like ignoring any ban potential in Expanded. The last time we saw Expanded, it was in that state where going second was pretty much just always better, and that was super unhealthy. And obviously Expanded has a lot of degen cards that factor into that, but I think limiting the first turn so heavily and then giving the second turn all the tools in the world is just super icky. First turn in any card game should usually be limited to some degree. It should always be gated somehow. But when it's gated to the point that you always choose to go second, then that's bad because it means you actually aren't really playing the game on your first turn.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's a good analysis of what we have going on. Let's move on to some viewer questions. Riley, were there some? I think there were some that you highlighted in the chat that you wanted to talk about.
They automatically got highlighted by the highlight feature, but
very good.
But John had posted that he wanted us to talk about Expanded, actually. So this is a nice little segue. And if Shaymin should eventually be banned. So with the advent of Scoop Up Net, is Shaymin maybe antiquated at this point? Does it no longer have a place in the metagame? What I'll preface this conversation with is that I don't think an errata will happen, and I don't really want an errata to happen. I think Pokemon was intentional in not including EXs on that card, and I don't think that's going to change. Follow-up to that, should Shaymin be banned? I mean, I don't see a reason why it should stay.
Sure.
Not even so much arguing for the ban, it's why argue against it? Shaymin enables all sorts of crazy things. It does insane combos. Crobat fills that niche in a more healthy, sustainable way. And someone in chat earlier had asked, as a follow-up question, if Shaymin remains unbanned, should we unban Hex and Ghetsis? And I don't think that's the solution. I think if it comes down to bringing some of the most toxic cards the game has ever seen, or get rid of Shaymin, I would rather get rid of Shaymin. And I think Dedenne and Crobat are just the healthier evolution of how that draw 6 Pokemon should look, especially in a world where Scoop Up Net exists.
Right.
So do you have any more take on the Shaymin debate?
No, I think you outlined it really, really well.
Yeah. Blizzy Memes asked, do you think Twin Energy is too good for Expanded? No.
It's pretty balanced. I think there are enough cards that can.
I mean, here's the thing, right? DC.
Well, and then you have so many busted cards that it's to take out some of those busted cards to put in Twin Energy.
Say. Part of the reason that DCE is so good and people like it so much, and that it was hated and got all this bad name for it, is because it gives you all that extra deck space to be flexible. So decks like Night March, they only want the 4 DCE most of the time, like with special charge, and the special charge gives them 6, and so that's satisfactory. Like they're only trying to attack a couple times. Does Twin Energy potentially give them a boost in formats, especially where there's a lot of denial? Sure, but not like so much more that I think it really changes anything.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I don't think that Twin Energy is necessarily that bad, because you probably wouldn't see it as like an 8 count. That feels just to have
no, it defeats the point.
You're right. To have like 1/10 of your deck be energy just feels wrong. And then in that capacity, right, where you're looking at it through the lens of a Night March or a Lost March, and then yeah, it just feels like there are too many other good cards that already facilitate your getting the energy out, that you don't need too many more beyond the 4. I mean, you could maybe run 5, 6, but at a certain point, like, you're defeating the purpose of your own deck.
Yeah.
So,
John, as a follow-up question, asking, if how does Expanded get affected overall by a Shaman ban, with control being such a large thing? And I think you can't really look at it like that necessarily. Whereas like, yeah, Shaman enables fun, crazy combos, but Shaman also enables really unhealthy things. And ultimately, Shaman is not a balanceable card if they're not going to call out EXs in the future. And so, yeah, they could ban Scoop Up Net, but what's the next thing that's going to be broken with Shaman? We're going to start having to ban all sorts of cards to account for the fact that Shaman exists. Trev Noir, Gengar Mimikyu. Gengar Mimikyu might be worth a ban anyway.
right.
But, like Trev Noir is a good example, where that's a really toxic combo that's enabled by Shaman. Shaman is what makes that deck work. It's a Shaman deck that plays a Trev Noir in it.
Right.
So... we can't forever ignore the problem and ban around Shaman. Like, Shaman is what enables toxic combo decks.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Any other questions here from chat? Horsey asks, how would you guys feel if Pokemon made a new Bridget card that was allowed to be played on the first turn? I think I would be in favor of that. If it worked like how Bridget did, where you couldn't use it on, the major two prizes of the day. Back then it was EX. You could get 1 EX or 3 basic. So if it worked in a similar way where you could only get 1 V or 3 basic Pokemon, then I think I'd be in favor of that. That sounds great.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know what it necessarily changes.
Yeah, but I think you reached ultimately a tough point where evolution decks still probably won't be viable, and there's not a Lele in this format to like make Bridget work. Bridget was really facilitated by Lele's existence.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I will take one last question here, and that's from Big D 54321. Asking, do you guys do coaching? I personally don't coach right now. I'm a little too busy in my regular career. JW, do you have any extra coaching slots still?
I do. Yeah, I do coaching.
Yeah, so reach out to Real John Walter on Twitter. Just shoot him over a DM, and he'll get back to you right away with with that coaching.
ASAP.
Awesome.
No, but if you do want more information on coaching, I do offer that in the Discord. I have a whole little section devoted to that. So
yeah, JW is a really good coach. Heard nothing but good things from his clients. So this is not me from a biased perspective. This is me hearing this from his actual coachees.
Very good.
So
well, thank you guys again for joining us. It feels crazy wrapping up season 2, man.
Yeah.
Maybe not this week, maybe not next week,
probably
pretty soon. We're getting to the end here.
Next week, actually.
Yeah.
Wow. So I got ideas though. I'm brewing.
I've been wanting to get in touch with you, bro. We got to get some.
Though. I have been brewing.
Okay, good. I'm excited to hear what you have to bring. I am like, I really want to know where you want to take the casts.
Yeah. Well.
Because
yeah,
could be cool.
So we got good things in store for you in the future. Thank you all so much for the continued support and listening. If you're looking to play in the POG Championship, be sure to check out fullgripcodes.com to get all your TCGO needs fulfilled. And we will be catching you guys next time. Peace.
See ya.